Jesse's hands tremble as he grips the saddle horn, the wild stallion exploding beneath him, while two identical giants watch with hungry eyes. One wrong move and he's thrown. One right move and he belongs to them forever. The entire ranch has stopped to witness what happens when a desperate farm boy finally stops running from what he is. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The summer heat pressed down on Thornfield Ranch like a fever that wouldn't break. Jesse Crawford wiped sweat from his brow, his shirt already soaked through before noon, clinging to lean muscle earned from 3 years of backbreaking work on his family's failing farm outside Redemption. At 22, he'd never been more than 15 miles from home, never known anything beyond dawn chores and debt collectors knocking on weathered doors. But desperation makes men brave, and when the Crawford farm finally went under, Jesse found himself riding toward the biggest spread in 3 counties with nothing but a letter of recommendation from a preacher and pride he couldn't afford to keep. The Maddox twins owned everything worth owning in this corner of Texas. Their cattle grazed on land that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Their brand marked half the horses in the territory, and their reputation preceded them like thunder before a storm. Cain and Abel Maddox, named by a mother with a dark sense of humor and raised by a father who believed in ruling his empire with an iron fist. They'd inherited that empire 5 years ago when a rattlesnake and a bottle of whiskey had settled the old man's fate, and since then, they'd only grown more powerful, more ruthless, more everything the territory whispered about in saloons and churches alike. Jesse had heard the stories, everyone had. The twins who looked so identical that only their mother could tell them apart before she died. The brothers who shared everything, competed over nothing, and moved through the world like two halves of the same dangerous whole. Men said they could finish each other's sentences, that they thought with one mind, that crossing one meant crossing both, and that was a mistake no one made twice. But stories didn't pay debts, and Jesse needed work more than he needed to be cautious. So when his horse crested the final hill and Thornfield Ranch spread out before him, all he felt was the tight knot of hope mixed with the kind of fear that keeps a man alert. The main house rose 3 stories high, painted white despite the dust, with a wraparound porch that spoke of money and power. The bunkhouse stretched long and low nearby, and beyond that, corrals and barns formed a small city of their own. Men moved with purpose through the heat, and the air carried the scent of leather, hay, and something else. Something Jesse couldn't quite name, but recognized instinctively as authority. He dismounted near the main corral, his legs unsteady. After the long ride, his throat was dry as the dust under his boots, and his hands trembled slightly as he tied off his horse. This was it. Either he impressed them enough to earn a place, or he'd be riding back to nothing with even less than he'd left with. "Help you with something?" The voice came from behind, low and smooth as aged whiskey. Jesse turned and forgot how to breathe. The man standing there was easily 6'4", maybe more, built like he'd been carved from the same red rock that jutted from the canyon walls. Shoulders broad enough to block the sun, arms that strained against rolled-up sleeves, hands that looked like they could break a man in half or hold him with surprising gentleness, depending on mood. Dark hair fell just past his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds studied Jesse with an intensity that made him feel stripped bare despite being fully clothed. "I'm, Jesse Crawford, sir. I'm here about the ranch hand position. I was told to ask for the Maddox brothers." The giant of a man didn't smile, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Amusement maybe, or interest, or something Jesse didn't have words for. That's so. And what makes you think you can handle work here? Before Jesse could answer, another voice cut through the heat, identical in timbre but different in tone, sharper somehow, more dangerous. Kane, you playing gatekeeper again? Thought we agreed that was my job. Jesse turned and his stomach dropped. The second man was identical to the first in every way that mattered. Same height, same build, same face that looked like it had been designed to make lesser men feel inadequate. The only difference Jesse could see was in their eyes. Where the first man, Kane, had studied him with cool assessment, this one, Abel, looked at him like a wolf that had just spotted something interesting to chase. Abel. Kane's voice carried a note of warning that Jesse didn't understand. Mr. Crawford here is looking for work. Crawford? Abel moved closer, circling Jesse slowly, and it took everything the younger man had not to flinch, not to step back, not to show the fear that licked up his spine like flame. That's the farm that went under last month, isn't it? Heard the bank took everything. Heat flooded Jesse's face, shame and anger mixing. Yes, sir. Which is why I'm here. I'm a hard worker, sir. Grew up on that farm. I can handle horses, cattle, anything you need. I don't complain, don't cause trouble, and I learn fast. The twins exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them that Jesse couldn't decipher. His heart hammered against his ribs. He needed this. God, he needed this so badly he could taste it. Bitter as medicine, necessary as air. Can you follow orders? Kane asked, his voice dropping lower, taking on a quality that made Jesse's skin prickle with awareness he didn't want to examine. Yes, sir. Can you keep your mouth shut when things get difficult? Abel added, moving to stand on Jesse's other side, effectively boxing him in between their considerable presence. Yes, sir. And can you handle being away from everything you know, living in close quarters with men who don't suffer weakness? Kane leaned in slightly, and Jesse caught the scent of leather and something darker, something that made his pulse race, for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Or maybe everything to do with a different kind of fear entirely. Jesse swallowed hard, lifting his chin even as his hands shook. I can handle whatever you throw at me. I just need a chance to prove it. The silence stretched out, thick as molasses, heavy as the heat. Jesse felt sweat roll down his spine, felt the weight of their combined attention, like a physical thing pressing against him. He'd never felt so small, so exposed, so aware of how much power these men held over his immediate future. Finally, Abel smiled, but it wasn't a comforting expression. It was the smile of a man who just won something, claimed something, decided something that Jesse wasn't privy to yet. Well, Kane, what do you think? Should we give the pretty farm boy a chance? Pretty. The word hit Jesse like a slap, bringing heat to his face that had nothing to do with the sun. He opened his mouth to protest, to assert some kind of dignity, but Kane spoke first. We're short-handed with Marcus leaving. Could use someone willing to work hard and keep out of trouble. He paused, and when his eyes met Jesse's again, there was something in them that made Jesse's breath catch. But understand this, Crawford. On this ranch, we don't tolerate disobedience. We don't accept excuses, and we expect absolute loyalty. You work for us. You belong to us until you decide to leave. That clear? Belong to us. The phrase echoed in Jesse's head, carrying implications he didn't want to think about, stirring feelings he'd spent years trying to ignore, to bury, to pretend didn't exist in a world that had no place for them. Crystal clear, sir? Abel laughed, the sound carrying across the yard and turning a few heads. Oh, I like him, Kane. He's got fire under all that nervous energy. This might actually be interesting. Might be, Kane agreed, his voice neutral, but his eyes anything but. Take your horse to the stable. Miguel will show you which bunk is yours. You start tomorrow at dawn. Don't be late. Thank you, sir. Sirs, I won't let you down. As Jesse led his horse away, he could feel their eyes on him, burning into his back like brands. His hands trembled as he gripped the reins, and something deep in his chest told him he'd just stepped into something far more complicated than simple ranch work. Behind him, too quiet for him to hear, Abel leaned toward his brother. Think he knows? No, Kane replied, his voice thoughtful. But he will. How long do you give him before he runs? He won't run. Did you see his eyes? That's desperation mixed with something else. Something we can work with. Shame about that innocence, though. Won't last long here. No, Kane agreed, something dark and hungry sliding into his tone. It won't. The bunkhouse smelled of sweat, leather, and years of hard living. Jesse found his assigned bunk, a narrow cot near the back wall with a thin mattress and a wool blanket that had seen better days. He sat down heavily, his legs finally giving out, and pressed his palms against his thighs to stop their shaking. Around him, other ranch hands moved through their routines, barely sparing him a glance. These were hard men, weathered by sun and work, carrying themselves with the confidence of those who'd earned their place through blood and sweat. Jesse felt like a child among them, barely holding on to the edges of manhood, pretending its strength he wasn't sure he possessed. You the new kid? Jesse looked up to find a lean man with Mexican features and kind eyes standing nearby, holding a tin cup of what smelled like strong coffee. He looked to be in his 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he'd found humor, even in this harsh life. Yes, sir. Jesse Crawford. Miguel Torres. I run the stables. Heard the twins hired you on. He handed Jesse the coffee without asking if he wanted it, and Jesse took it gratefully, the bitter heat grounding him. Word of advice, kid. Keep your head down, do your work, and don't get in their way when they're in one of their moods. Their moods? Miguel's expression shifted, becoming careful. The Maddox brothers are good bosses if you follow the rules. Fair pay, decent conditions, they take care of their men. But they're also... He paused, searching for words. Intense. They expect complete loyalty, complete obedience, and they don't like being challenged or questioned. I understand. Do you? Miguel's eyes were sharp now, assessing, because I've seen men come through here thinking they understood, and they didn't last a month. The twins have a way of getting under your skin, of making you feel things, want things. He stopped abruptly, as if he'd said too much. Just be careful, Jesse. That's all I'm saying. Before Jesse could ask what he meant, Miguel walked away, leaving him alone with his coffee and his confusion. The warning settled heavy in his chest, mixing with the exhaustion of the long ride and the emotional weight of everything he'd lost. That night, Jesse lay awake in his bunk, listening to the sounds of sleeping men around him. The creak of wood settling, the distant lowing of cattle. Through the small window above his head, he could see the main house, lights still burning in the upper floor despite the late hour. He thought about the twins, about the way they'd looked at him, about the promises and threats wrapped up in their words. He thought about Miguel's warning, about the strange intensity that seemed to fill the air whenever the Maddox brothers were near, and, deep in his chest, in a place he'd learned to keep locked and buried, something stirred, something dangerous and desperate, and entirely unwelcome. Because Jesse Crawford had learned years ago what happened to men like him. Men who looked at other men the way he sometimes caught himself looking. He'd learned to hide it, to crush it down, to pretend it didn't exist. But lying there in the darkness, remembering storm-gray eyes and the timbre of voices that made his skin prickle with awareness, Jesse had the terrible feeling that all his careful hiding was about to become impossible. Dawn came too early and too bright. Jesse woke to the sound of men moving, pulling on clothes and boots, the rough camaraderie of morning insults and laughter. He dressed quickly, his muscles already protesting from the previous day's ride, and followed the others to the main yard where work assignments were given. Cain stood on the porch of the main house, clipboard in hand, Abel beside him with arms crossed over his chest. In the morning light, they looked even more imposing, if that was possible. Jesse found himself staring before catching himself and dropping his gaze to the dusty ground. Crawford, his head snapped up. Cain was looking directly at him, expression unreadable. "You're with Abel today. He'll show you the ropes. See what you're worth." Jesse's stomach dropped. Being alone with one of the twins felt dangerous in ways he couldn't articulate. But he nodded, straightening his shoulders. "Yes, sir." Abel pushed off from the porch railing, moving with the easy grace of a predator. "Come on then, farm boy. Let's see if you're as capable as you claim." They walked toward the stables, Abel's long strides forcing Jesse to move quickly to keep up. The older man didn't speak, didn't look at him, but Jesse could feel the awareness between them like electricity in the air before a storm. In the stable, Abel stopped in front of a large black stallion that stamped and snorted, clearly displeased with the halter being brought near. "This is Diablo, needs to be broken to saddle. Think you can handle him?" Jesse looked at the massive horse, at the wild intelligence in its eyes, at the way it pulled against the lead rope held by one of the stable hands. He'd broken horses before, but nothing like this. Nothing with this much fire and strength. "I can try, sir." Abel's laugh was low and dangerous. "Oh, I'm counting on it. Let's see how you handle something bigger and stronger than you, something that doesn't want to submit." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, and when Abel's eyes met his, Jesse saw the challenge there, the test, the promise of something he didn't dare name. His hands trembled as he approached the horse, and he wasn't sure if it was from fear of the animal or fear of what this moment represented. But he'd told the truth yesterday. He could handle whatever they threw at him. He had to believe that. Even if every instinct screamed that he was walking into something far more dangerous than a wild horse. Even if somewhere deep down, in that locked and buried place, a part of him whispered that danger might be exactly what he'd been seeking all along. The stallion snorted, eyes rolling white as Jesse moved closer. He could feel Abel watching, feel the weight of that scrutiny like heat against his skin. The stable hand holding the lead rope looked nervous, sweat beading on his forehead despite the relative cool of the barn. "Easy now," Jesse murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. He'd learned young that horses could sense fear, could smell it on you like blood and water. "Nobody's going to hurt you, just want to get to know you." He extended his hand slowly, palm up, non-threatening. Diablo's nostrils flared, testing his scent, and for a moment Jesse thought the horse might strike. But then something shifted. The wild eye settled, just slightly, and the massive head lowered a fraction. "That's it," Jesse whispered. "See, I'm not the enemy here." Behind him, Abel made a sound, something between approval and surprise. Jesse didn't turn, didn't break the connection he was building with the animal. His fingers brushed against the velvet nose, and Diablo allowed it, though every muscle remained taut, ready to bolt or fight. "You've got away with him," Abel said, his voice closer now, and Jesse realized the older man had moved without him noticing. Most men would have gone straight for dominance, force and fear, but you're asking permission. "My pa taught me that breaking a horse isn't about breaking its spirit," Jesse replied, still focused on the stallion. "It's about earning trust, making them want to work with you instead of against you." Smart man, your father. He was. The words came out rougher than intended, carrying the weight of loss. Bank took the farm 3 days after we buried him. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't empty. Jesse could feel Abel studying him, reading him, seeing things Jesse wasn't sure he wanted seen. His skin prickled with awareness, every nerve ending suddenly alert to the man standing close enough that Jesse could feel the heat radiating from that massive frame. Loss makes us stronger, Abel said finally, or it breaks us completely. Which one are you, Jesse Crawford? It was the first time either twin had used his given name, and hearing it in that deep, rough voice did something to Jesse's equilibrium. He swallowed hard, his hand stilling against Diablo's neck. I'm still figuring that out, sir. Are you? Abel moved closer still, and now Jesse could feel breath against the back of his neck, warm and steady. Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who spent his whole life being broken down, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but need and desperation. And that makes you dangerous, farm boy. Not to us, but to yourself. Jesse turned then, unable to help himself, and found Abel mere inches away. Up close, the man was even more overwhelming. Jesse had to tilt his head back to meet those storm-gray eyes, and what he saw there made his breath catch. Hunger, recognition, a promise of something Jesse had never dared want. I don't understand, he whispered. Abel's smile was slow, predatory. You will. He reached past Jesse, his arm brushing against the younger man's shoulder, and took the lead rope from the stable hand's shaking grip. That's all, Marcus. Go help Miguel with the feed. The stable hand fled, and suddenly Jesse was alone with Abel and the half-wild horse in the dim coolness of the barn. The moment felt significant somehow, weighted with meaning Jesse couldn't quite grasp. Here's what's going to happen, Abel said, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. You're going to spend the next week with this horse, morning and night. You're going to earn his trust, gentle him, make him yours. And while you're doing that, I'm going to watch. Going to see how you handle pressure, how you deal with something that could hurt you if you make one wrong move. Jesse's mouth had gone dry. And if I fail, you won't. Abel handed him the rope, and when their fingers touched, Jesse felt electricity arc between them. Because failure isn't an option on this ranch. We don't accept it, don't tolerate it. You succeed, or you don't belong here. I'll succeed, Jesse said, forcing steel into his voice even as his hands trembled around the rope. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, Abel echoed, and something in his tone made it sound like a vow, like a warning, like a promise of things to come. I'm gonna hold you to that, farm boy. He walked away then, his boots echoing on the barn floor, leaving Jesse alone with the stallion and a feeling in his chest that was equal parts terror and anticipation. He looked at Diablo, saw himself reflected in those wild eyes, and understood with sudden clarity that this wasn't just about breaking a horse. This was about whether Jesse Crawford would allow himself to be broken or transformed. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of hard work and harder lessons. Jesse mucked stalls, hauled water, mended fence posts until his hands bled and his back screamed. The other ranch hands watched him with a mixture of pity and amusement, the way men always watch someone new being tested. By the time the dinner bell rang, Jesse could barely move. He stumbled to the mess hall with the others, his legs shaking, his shirt plastered to his back with sweat and dirt. The food was simple but plentiful, beans and cornbread and strong coffee, and Jesse ate mechanically, too exhausted to taste anything. You'll get used to it, Miguel said, sitting down across from him. First week is always the hardest. They want to see if you'll break. I won't break, Jesse muttered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. That's what they all say. Miguel's voice was kind but sad. But the Maddox brothers have a way of finding your limits, of pushing you right to the edge and then pushing a little further. Some men thrive on it. Others, he shrugged. Others realize they're in over their heads. Jesse looked up, meeting the older man's eyes. Which one were you? A faint smile crossed Miguel's weathered face. I survived. That's all that matters out here. Survival. He paused, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. But I'll tell you something, kid. The twins don't just want workers. They want loyalty, devotion. They want men who will follow them anywhere, do anything they ask. And in return, they take care of their own, protect them, make sure they're never alone. That doesn't sound so bad, doesn't it? Miguel's eyes were sharp. What are you willing to give up for that kind of security, Jesse? What parts of yourself are you ready to surrender? Before Jesse could answer, a shadow fell across the table. He looked up to find Cain standing there, silent as death, those gray eyes studying him with an intensity that made Jesse's skin flush hot despite his exhaustion. Crawford, finish your food and meet me at the main house in 10 minutes. Yes, sir. Jesse's voice came out steadier than he felt. Cain walked away without another word, and Jesse realized the entire mess hall had gone quiet. All eyes were on him now, the new kid being singled out by one of the twins on his very first day. He could feel the speculation, the curiosity, the envy and wariness all mixed together. Better not keep him waiting, Miguel said softly. The twins value punctuality above almost everything else. Jesse forced down the rest of his food, though it sat heavy as stones in his belly. His legs protested as he stood, but he ignored the pain and made his way out into the evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and for a moment Jesse just stood there, breathing in the smell of dust and horses and something else, something wild and untamed that this land seemed to exhale. The main house loomed before him, 3 stories of white paint and dark windows. Jesse climbed the porch steps slowly, his heart hammering, and raised his hand to knock. But before his knuckles could connect with wood, the door swung open. Cain stood in the doorway, backlit by golden lamplight, looking like something out of a fever dream. He'd removed his work shirt, wearing only a thin undershirt that clung to the muscles of his chest and arms. Jesse's eyes caught on the sight before he could stop himself, and when he looked up, he found Cain watching him with an expression that made his blood run cold and hot all at once. "Come in," Cain said, his voice rougher than it had been earlier. "We need to talk." Jesse stepped over the threshold, and the door closed behind him with a finality that felt like a trap snapping shut. The interior of the house was beautiful in a spare, masculine way. Dark wood and leather furniture, animal heads mounted on walls, a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Everything spoke of money and power and men who took what they wanted without apology. "Drink?" Cain moved to a sideboard where crystal decanters gleamed in the lamplight. "No thank you, sir. I don't drink." "Smart." Cain poured himself a measure of amber liquid, then turned to face Jesse fully. "My brother tells me you did well today, with the horse." "I tried my best, sir." "Your best." Cain took a sip, his eyes never leaving Jesse's face. "Abel seems to think your best might be something special, that you've got potential most men don't. Is he right?" Jesse swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "Don't you?" Cain moved closer, and Jesse found himself backing up until his shoulders hit the wall. The older man stopped just short of touching, close enough that Jesse could smell whiskey and leather, and something uniquely male. "I think you understand more than you're letting on. I think you've spent your whole life pretending, hiding, trying to be something you're not. And now you're here, surrounded by hard men doing hard work. and you're wondering if maybe, just maybe, this is where you finally get to stop pretending. Jesse's breath came faster, his chest tight. I don't know what you're talking about. Liar. The word was soft but cutting. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You knew the moment you saw us, recognized something, felt something, and it terrified you. Sir, Shh. Cain lifted one hand, and Jesse fell silent automatically, the command in that simple gesture absolute. I'm not going to hurt you, Jesse. Neither is Abel. But we are going to push you, test you, see what you're really made of underneath all that fear and desperation. And if you're strong enough, brave enough, honest enough with yourself, then you might just find what you've been looking for your whole life. And what's that? Jesse whispered. Cain smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing Jesse had ever seen. A home, a place to belong, men who'll never let you go. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. Jesse wanted to run, wanted to bolt out the door and never look back. But his feet wouldn't move, and his eyes couldn't look away from Cain's face, and somewhere deep in his chest, that locked and buried part of him was screaming, yes, yes, finally yes. I should go, he managed. It's late. You should. Cain stepped back, giving him space. But before you do, understand this. What happens on this ranch, what happens between the three of us, it stays here. No one else needs to know. No one else gets to judge. This is our world, and in our world, we make our own rules. Jesse nodded, not trusting his voice. Good boy. The words sent heat flooding through Jesse's entire body. Now go, get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be even harder than today. Jesse fled. There was no other word for it. He stumbled out of the house and across the yard, his legs barely holding him up, his mind spinning with everything Cain had said, with everything implied in those gray eyes. He made it to the bunkhouse and collapsed on his cot, fully clothed, his heart racing like he'd just run a mile. Around him, other men were already sleeping, their snores filling the darkness. But Jesse lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. Abel's voice in his ear, Cain's body blocking his escape, the promise of something he'd never dared dream possible. And beneath it all, the terrifying realization that he wanted it. Wanted whatever they were offering, whatever test they were putting him through. Wanted to belong to something, to someone, so badly it ached like hunger, like thirst, like dying slowly in the desert with water just out of reach. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams that left him gasping and confused, waking in the dark with his body aching and his mind refusing to remember what his sleeping self had seen. And through it all, he could feel them watching, even in absence, even in dreams. The Maddox twins, who shared everything, who moved as one, who had looked at Jesse Crawford and decided he was worth claiming, whether he was ready for it or not. The second week at Thornfield Ranch passed like a fever dream, each day bleeding into the next in a haze of exhaustion and mounting tension that Jesse felt in every fiber of his being. True to Abel's word, Jesse spent his mornings and evenings with Diablo, learning the stallion's moods, earning his trust one careful touch at a time. And true to his promise, Abel watched, sometimes from the stable doorway, leaning against the frame with arms crossed and eyes unreadable, sometimes from atop the corral fence, sitting with perfect stillness while Jesse worked, sometimes close enough that Jesse could feel him there, even when his back was turned, a presence that made every hair on his body stand at attention. But it wasn't just Abel. Cain had his own ways of testing, of pushing, of seeing how far Jesse would bend before breaking. Extra work assignments that left Jesse's muscles screaming, Questions that seemed innocent but probed at Jesse's carefully constructed defenses. Moments of unexpected kindness that were somehow more unsettling than harshness would have been. "You're doing well," Kane said one afternoon, appearing beside Jesse as he hauled water to the far pasture. Without being asked, the older man took one of the heavy buckets, his strength making the load look effortless. "Better than expected." Jesse wiped sweat from his face, his shirt clinging to his back in the oppressive heat. "Thank you, sir. The men respect you. That's not easy to earn in 2 weeks." Kane's voice was conversational, but his eyes were sharp. "Miguel says you helped young Tommy with the fence posts yesterday. Showed him a technique your father taught you." "It's nothing." Kid was struggling. "It's not nothing." They walked side by side toward the water trough, and Jesse was intensely aware of how small he felt next to Kane's towering frame. Most men here are too worried about their own work to help anyone else, but you see someone in trouble and you step in. "Why?" Jesse shrugged uncomfortably. "It's just the right thing to do." "The right thing." Kane set down his bucket, and suddenly his hand was on Jesse's shoulder, heavy and warm through the thin fabric of his shirt. "You're a good man, Jesse Crawford. Better than you give yourself credit for. That's rare out here. Precious even." The touch lasted only a moment, but Jesse felt it long after Kane had walked away. Felt the ghost of those fingers burning through his skin like a brand. He stood there in the afternoon sun, heart racing, trying to understand why such a simple gesture had shaken him so completely. That night, lying in his bunk, Jesse finally admitted to himself what he'd been denying for 2 weeks. He was attracted to them, both of them. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, like acknowledging something dangerous and forbidden that could never be taken back. He'd spent years burying these feelings, pretending they didn't exist, telling himself it was just loneliness or confusion or anything but the truth, but there was no denying it anymore. When Abel watched him with those predatory eyes, Jesse's pulse quickened. When Kane's voice dropped low and intimate, Jesse's skin flushed hot. When either of them stood close, Jesse had to fight the urge to lean in, to close the distance, to discover what would happen if he stopped running from what he was. The realization terrified him, but it also felt like finally taking a full breath after years of suffocating. On the 15th day, everything changed. Jesse was in the stable with Diablo, preparing to attempt saddling the stallion for the first time. The horse had gentled considerably, allowing Jesse to touch him freely, even responding to voice commands. But a saddle was different. That was submission, acceptance of control, and Jesse wasn't sure if Diablo was ready. "He's ready," Abel said, appearing in the doorway like he'd read Jesse's thoughts. "Question is, are you?" Jesse looked at the saddle in his hands, heavy leather worn smooth by years of use. "I don't want to ruin the progress we've made. If I push too hard, if you don't push at all, you'll never know what he's capable of." Abel moved into the stable, and with him came Kane, the twins flanking Jesse on either side. Life's about knowing when to push and when to wait, and right now, waiting is just fear disguised as caution. Kane nodded toward the stallion. "Put the saddle on him, Jesse. Show us what you're made of." Jesse's hands trembled as he approached Diablo. The horse watched him, ears forward, sensing the change in energy. Jesse murmured soft words, maintaining the trust they'd built, and slowly, carefully, lifted the saddle. Diablo's skin twitched, his head came up, eyes rolling slightly. Jesse froze, waiting, giving the stallion time to process, and then, miracle of miracles, Diablo's muscles relaxed. He didn't bolt, didn't fight, just stood there, accepting the weight, accepting Jesse's touch, accepting what this meant. Good, Abel breathed. "Now secure it." Jesse worked with shaking hands, tightening straps, making adjustments. The entire time, he could feel the twins watching, feel the weight of their attention like physical touch. When he finished, he stepped back, hardly daring to believe it had worked. "Mount him," Cain ordered. Jesse's head snapped around. "Sir?" "You heard me. Get on the horse. Show us you can ride what you've broken." It was a test. Jesse understood that immediately. Not just of his skill with horses, but of his courage, his willingness to follow orders even when fear told him to refuse. He looked at Diablo, at the saddle that suddenly seemed impossibly high, and made his choice. He grabbed the pommel and swung himself up in one smooth motion. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Diablo stood perfectly still, adjusting to the weight on his back. And then the stallion exploded. Jesse had been on plenty of bucking horses before, but nothing compared to Diablo's raw power. The world became a violent blur of motion as the stallion twisted and kicked, trying to throw him. Jesse held on with everything he had, his thighs clamped tight, one hand fisted in the horse's mane, the other gripping the saddle horn. He heard shouting, realized dimly that other ranch hands had gathered to watch. But all his focus was on staying mounted, on reading Diablo's movements, on proving he deserved to be here. The stallion reared up and Jesse leaned forward, shifting his weight, refusing to be thrown. And then as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Diablo stood trembling, sides heaving, but still, conquered. Jesse sat frozen, his own chest heaving, hardly believing it was over. "Well, I'll be damned," someone muttered. Jesse looked up to find the entire yard had stopped to watch. Men stood in small clusters, expressions ranging from impressed to envious. But Jesse only had eyes for the twins, who stood shoulder to shoulder, identical expressions of satisfaction on their faces. "Dismount," Cain said quietly. Jesse slid down, his legs nearly giving out when his feet hit the ground. He caught himself against Diablo's neck, and the stallion turned his head, nuzzling Jesse's shoulder in what felt like acceptance, or forgiveness, or acknowledgement that they belonged to each other now. Abel approached, moving with that predatory grace, and suddenly his hand was cupping the back of Jesse's neck, thumb pressing against his racing pulse. "Knew you had it in you," he said, voice rough with something Jesse couldn't name. "Knew the moment I saw you that you were stronger than you looked." The touch was possessive, claiming, and Jesse couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there and feel the heat of Abel's palm against his skin. Around them, the gathered men began to disperse, returning to their work, but Jesse felt like his entire world had narrowed to this moment, this touch, this acknowledgement. "Come to the house tonight," Cain said, his voice carrying a note of command that made Jesse's stomach flip. "After dinner, we need to talk." Then they were gone, walking away side by side, leaving Jesse trembling against the stallion he'd just broken and wondering what he'd truly agreed to when he'd taken this job. Miguel appeared at his elbow, expression unreadable. "Be careful, kid. You're playing with fire." "I know," Jesse whispered. And he did know. But for the first time in his life, he was ready to burn. Dinner tasted like sawdust in Jesse's mouth. He forced himself to eat, knowing he needed the energy, but his mind was elsewhere, on the main house, on what awaited him there, on the twins who'd looked at him like he was something valuable, something worth keeping. The other ranch hands talked and laughed around him, but Jesse barely heard them. Young Tommy kept trying to engage him in conversation about fence techniques, but Jesse's responses were distracted at best. Miguel watched him with sad, knowing eyes, but said nothing. When the meal finally ended, Jesse stood on shaking legs and made his way across the yard. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and blues, and lights glowed warm in the windows of the main house. Jesse climbed the porch steps slowly, each one feeling like walking toward his own judgment day. This time, he knocked. The door opened immediately, as if they'd been waiting. Abel stood there, and he'd changed clothes, wearing dark trousers and a crisp white shirt that made his eyes look even more intense. "Come in, Jesse." The use of his first name, spoken in that deep voice, sent shivers down Jesse's spine. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with that same sense of finality he'd felt the first time. Cain waited in the main room, standing by the fireplace where flames crackled and danced. He'd dressed similarly to his brother, and seeing them side by side like this, Jesse was struck again by how perfectly identical they were. Two halves of a dangerous whole. "Sit," Cain said, gesturing to a leather chair. "We've put this conversation off long enough." Jesse sat, his back rigid, hands clenched in his lap. "Have I done something wrong, sir?" "Wrong?" Abel laughed, moving to pour 3 glasses of whiskey, despite Jesse's earlier refusal to drink. "No, farm boy. You've done everything exactly right. That's what we need to discuss." He handed Jesse a glass, and when their fingers touched, Jesse felt that now familiar electric spark. Abel noticed, his eyes darkening with recognition, and Jesse quickly looked away, heat flooding his face. "2 weeks ago," Cain began, settling into the chair across from Jesse, "a desperate boy showed up at our gate with nothing but pride and fear. We could have sent him away. Should have, probably. We don't usually hire men so young, so inexperienced, so obviously running from something." "I wasn't running?" "You were." Abel sat on the arm of Cain's chair, the casual intimacy of the gesture speaking volumes. "From a farm that couldn't feed you, from a town that would never understand you, from yourself most of all. But we saw something in you, something that made us decide to take a chance." Jesse's throat had gone tight. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Cain leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes boring into Jesse's. "You're not like the other men here. You're softer, gentler, the kind of man who helps when he doesn't have to, who breaks horses through patience instead of force, who looks at us with eyes that see more than just bosses who sign his pay." The air had become thick, charged with something Jesse couldn't name but felt in every nerve ending. "Sir, Shh." Abel rose and moved behind Jesse's chair, and Jesse felt fingers trail across his shoulders, burning through the fabric of his shirt. "We know what you are, Jesse. We've always known. The question is, do you?" Jesse's breath came fast and shallow. His hands trembled around the whiskey glass. I can't." "Can't what?" Cain's voice had dropped to something intimate, almost gentle. "Can't admit that you watch us when you think we're not looking. Can't acknowledge that you feel something when we're near. Can't say out loud what you've been hiding your whole life." Tears burned behind Jesse's eyes. He'd spent so long burying this, denying this, pretending he was normal, that he fit into the world the way men were supposed to. And now these two were stripping away all his defenses, exposing the raw, aching truth he'd tried so hard to hide. "It's wrong," he whispered. "What I am, what I feel. The Bible says a lot of things," Abel interrupted, his hands still moving across Jesse's shoulders, kneading tension from muscles Jesse hadn't realized were tight. "But out here, in this place, we make our own rules. And our rule is simple. Be honest about what you want, about who you are." "I want..." Jesse's voice broke. He couldn't say it, couldn't give voice to the desperate hunger that had been growing in his chest for 2 weeks, for years, for his entire life. "Say it," Cain ordered, his voice hard now, commanding. "Say what you want, Jesse Crawford. No more hiding, no more pretending." and something in Jesse broke. Or maybe it was something finally opening, finally allowing itself to breathe. He looked up, meeting Cain's eyes, then turning to meet Abel's, and let the truth fall from his lips like a confession, like a prayer, like a drowning man, finally admitting he needs air. I want to stay. I want to belong here. He swallowed hard, forcing the words out. I want you. Both of you. However you'll have me. The silence that followed was absolute. Jesse's heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He'd said it, finally said what he'd never dared speak aloud, and now there was no taking it back, no pretending, no hiding behind carefully constructed walls. Cain stood slowly, moving with deliberate purpose until he stood directly in front of Jesse. Look at me. Jesse did, and what he saw in those storm-gray eyes made his breath catch. Not disgust, not rejection, but hunger, recognition. The same desperate need Jesse had been fighting reflected back at him. We're going to give you a choice, Cain said quietly. You can walk out that door right now. Go back to the bunkhouse. Keep working here as just another ranch hand. We'll never mention this conversation again, and everything stays professional. Or, Jesse whispered. Or you stay, Abel finished, his hands sliding from Jesse's shoulders down his arms, slowly, deliberately, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. You stay, and you're ours. Not just an employee, ours. We take care of you, protect you, make sure you never want for anything. But in return, you give us everything. Your loyalty, your trust, your honesty, all of you. Jesse's mind reeled. This was insane, impossible. Everything he'd been taught said this was wrong, sinful, unnatural. Men didn't lie with men, didn't feel these things, didn't make these kinds of arrangements. But God, he wanted it so badly his entire body ached with longing, wanted to belong to something, to someone, to stop being alone and afraid and constantly hiding, wanted to be seen, really seen, and not turned away in disgust. He licked his dry lips. What would it mean, being yours? The twins exchanged one of their meaningful looks, some silent communication passing between them. Then Cain smiled, and it was both gentle and predatory all at once. It means you sleep in the house, in our room, in our bed. His voice was matter of fact, but Jesse felt each word like a physical blow. It means, when we call, you come. When we tell you to do something, you do it without question. It means you're ours to touch, to hold, to take care of. And in return, we make sure you're safe, fed, protected. We make sure no one ever hurts you or judges you or makes you feel ashamed of what you are. The other men, Jesse's voice was barely audible. They'll know. They already know about us, Abel said simply. Have for years. Some left. Most stayed. The ones who are here now understand that what happens in this house stays in this house. They don't ask questions, don't judge, don't cause problems, and anyone who does gets told to leave. This is our land, our rules, our life. Jesse sat frozen, his mind trying to process what they were offering. It was everything he'd ever wanted, and everything he'd been taught to fear, wrapped up in a package that should terrify him, but instead felt like coming home. He couldn't finish the sentence, but they understood. We know, Cain said gently. We'll teach you, slowly, carefully. We're not going to hurt you, Jesse. We're going to make you ours in every way that matters, but only if you choose it. Only if you say yes with full knowledge of what you're agreeing to. Jesse looked between them, these two powerful men who'd seen through his defenses from the very beginning, who'd tested him and pushed him and brought him to this moment of choice. His entire life had been leading to this crossroads. He could walk away, return to safety, to the familiar loneliness of being alone even in a crowd. Or he could step into the unknown, into danger, into a future that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He thought about his father, about the farm, about everything he'd lost, about the man he'd been pretending to be, and the man he actually was, about loneliness that ached like a physical wound, and the desperate hunger to belong somewhere, to someone. "Yes," he whispered. Then, stronger, "Yes, I choose this. I choose you, both of you." The transformation was immediate. Cain's eyes darkened with satisfaction, and Abel's hands tightened on Jesse's shoulders. The air itself seemed to shift, charged with promise and possession. "Stand up," Cain ordered, and Jesse obeyed automatically, his body responding to the command in that voice. Cain moved closer until barely an inch separated them, and reached up to cup Jesse's face in hands that were surprisingly gentle. "From this moment on, you belong to us. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good boy." The words sent heat flooding through Jesse's entire body. "Tonight, you'll sleep in our bed. Tomorrow, you'll move your things from the bunkhouse to the room we've prepared for you here. And from now on, when we want you, you come to us. No hesitation, no shame, just obedience." Jesse nodded, unable to speak around the tightness in his throat. This was real. This was happening. He'd just agreed to something that would change his entire life, and there was no going back. Abel moved to stand beside his brother, and together they bracketed Jesse between them, two walls of strength and heat and possession. "Don't look so terrified," Abel murmured, brushing hair back from Jesse's forehead in a gesture that was almost tender. "We're going to take care of you, make you feel things you've never felt before, give you everything you've been denied your whole life. But you have to trust us," Cain added. "Completely. Can you do that?" Jesse looked between them, at the identical faces that somehow seemed different when you knew them, at the eyes that held hunger and promise, and something that might have been affection, and made his choice. "I trust you?" The night that followed was unlike anything Jesse had ever experienced. They led him upstairs to a bedroom that was larger than any room Jesse had ever been in, dominated by a massive bed covered in dark linens. They undressed him slowly, reverently, peeling away layers of clothing along with years of shame and fear, and then they showed him what it meant to belong to someone, to be touched with purpose and care, to be seen completely and not turned away, to surrender control and find freedom in that surrender. Jesse learned the taste of whiskey on another man's lips, learned the feeling of being held between two bodies, surrounded and safe, learned that pleasure could be given as well as taken, that there were ways to connect that transcended everything he'd been taught was wrong. And through it all, he felt that locked and buried part of himself. Finally opening, breathing, coming alive after years of suffocation. When dawn broke, Jesse lay between the twins, exhausted and transformed. His body ached in new ways, his mind still reeling from everything he'd experienced. But beneath it all was a sense of rightness, of finally being exactly where he was meant to be. Cain stirred beside him, pressing a kiss to Jesse's shoulder. "How do you feel?" Jesse considered the question seriously. How did he feel? Different, changed, marked in ways that went beyond the physical. "Like I finally came home," he whispered. "Good." Abel's arms tightened around him from behind. "Because you have. This is your home now. We're your home, and we don't let go of what's ours." Jesse closed his eyes, letting the weight of those words settle over him. He'd come to Thornfield Ranch desperate and afraid, running from everything he'd lost. And somehow, in the span of 2 weeks, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. A place to belong. Men who saw him completely and wanted him anyway. A future that looked nothing like what he'd imagined, but felt more right than anything he'd ever known. The sun rose higher, spilling golden light through the windows, and Jesse Crawford, farm boy, orphan, lost soul, finally stopped running, finally stopped hiding, finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved this, deserved to be wanted, to be claimed, to be loved in whatever rough, fierce way these two dangerous men knew how to love. And as the day began, and the ranch came alive with the sounds of men working, horses neighing, cattle lowing, Jesse lay safe in the arms of the Maddox twins and let himself imagine a future where he never had to be alone again. A future where belonging wasn't just a dream, but a reality he could touch and hold and trust would still be there when he woke. A future that started now. The first week of Jesse's new life passed in a haze of wonder and adjustment. During the day, he worked alongside the other ranch hands, but there was a difference now. He carried himself with more confidence, walked taller, spoke with more certainty. The other men noticed but said nothing, their eyes sliding away when they saw the marks on Jesse's neck, the way he moved like someone claimed and content. Miguel was the only one who spoke to him about it. They were mucking stalls together when the older man finally broke the comfortable silence between them. "You look different," Miguel observed, his tone neutral. "Happier." Jesse felt heat rise to his face but didn't deny it. "I am." "They treating you right, the twins." "Better than I ever thought possible." Jesse paused in his work, leaning on his shovel. "I know what people must think, what it looks like. But Miguel, for the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Miguel nodded slowly, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "That's all that matters then. Life's too short to spend it pretending to be something you're not, living by rules that don't fit. If you found your place, hold on to it. You don't think it's wrong, what we are?" "Wrong?" Miguel laughed softly. "Kid, I've seen wrong. I've seen men beat their wives, abuse their children, steal from those who have nothing. What you have with the Maddox brothers, that's not wrong. That's just love, taking a different shape than most people expect. And love, real love, is never wrong." The words settled into Jesse's chest like a balm on an old wound. He'd been bracing himself for judgment, for condemnation, but instead found acceptance, understanding, permission to stop feeling ashamed of what brought him joy. That night, as Jesse lay between the twins in their massive bed, he shared Miguel's words with them. Cain's arm tightened around his waist, pulling him closer. "Miguel's a wise man," Cain murmured against Jesse's shoulder. "He's been with us for 8 years, seen men come and go. He understands that what matters is loyalty, trust, and taking care of your own." "He had someone once," Abel added from Jesse's other side, his fingers tracing idle patterns on Jesse's chest. "Another man who worked here. They were together for 3 years before sickness took him. Miguel understands loss, understands the value of finding connection wherever you can." Jesse absorbed this, filing away the information, understanding now why Miguel had looked at him with such knowing eyes. "I'm sorry he lost his person." "So are we," Cain said quietly. "But that's why we protect what we have, why we fight to keep our people safe. Life's too uncertain to waste time hiding or pretending or living by other people's rules." Jesse turned his head to press a kiss to Cain's jaw, then shifted to do the same to Abel. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm done pretending. This is who I am, and I'm not ashamed." "Good boy," Abel whispered, the words sending pleasant warmth through Jesse's entire body. "Now sleep. Tomorrow we're taking you into town." Jesse's eyes widened. "Town? You need proper clothes," Kane explained. "Boots that actually fit. A hat that doesn't have holes in it. We take care of our own, Jesse, and that means making sure you have what you need." "But the expense is ours to bear," Abel interrupted firmly. "You're ours. That means your needs are our responsibility. Stop arguing and accept it." Jesse wanted to protest further, but the command in Abel's voice silenced him. He was still learning this new dynamic, still adjusting to the reality of belonging to someone, of having his needs matter to others. It felt foreign and wonderful all at once. The trip to town was Jesse's first real test of his new status. Redemption wasn't large, but everyone knew everyone, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. When the Maddox twins rode in with Jesse between them, all three on horseback, people noticed. They stopped first at the general store, where Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened when she saw them. But Kane's cool stare and Abel's dangerous smile kept her from saying anything beyond polite greetings. The twins outfitted Jesse with everything he needed. New shirts, new trousers, a fine leather belt, boots that actually fit his feet, and a black Stetson that Abel placed on Jesse's head with possessive satisfaction. "Perfect," Abel declared, adjusting the hat's angle. "Now you look like you belong to us." Jesse caught sight of himself in the store's mirror and barely recognized the young man staring back. Gone was the desperate farm boy in threadbare clothes. In his place stood someone who looked cared for, valued, claimed. The transformation was more than physical. It showed in the way he held himself, in the light in his eyes. At the saloon, where they stopped for a meal, Jesse felt every eye in the room track their movements. The twins flanked him at a corner table, their presence making it clear that Jesse was under their protection. A few men Jesse recognized from neighboring ranches nodded respectfully. Others looked away quickly when they met the twins' hard stares. "Let 'em look," Kane said quietly, cutting into his steak. "Let 'em talk. By tomorrow, everyone in 3 counties will know you're ours. That's what we want. No confusion, no questions about where you stand." Jesse's hands trembled slightly around his fork. "Aren't you worried about what they'll say?" "No," Abel said simply. "We stopped worrying about that years ago. People can think what they want, say what they want. As long as they respect our boundaries and don't interfere with our business, their opinions don't matter." "And if they do interfere?" The twins exchanged one of their meaningful looks, and something cold passed between them. "Then we remind them why it's unwise to cross the Maddox brothers," Kane said softly. "We protect what's ours, Jesse. Always." The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the afternoon sun warm on Jesse's shoulders. He wore his new clothes, his new hat, and felt like a different person than the desperate boy who'd arrived at Thornfield's gates 3 weeks ago. Everything had changed. He had changed. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Jesse stood at the window of the twins' bedroom, looking out over the land that was now his home. The prairie stretched endless under a star-filled sky, and somewhere out there, his old life existed like a dream he could barely remember. "Regrets?" Kane asked, coming to stand behind him, arms wrapping around Jesse's waist. "No," Jesse said honestly. "Not a single one. I just keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream, that I'm back in the bunkhouse, alone, still pretending. Not a dream." Abel joined them, pressing against Jesse's back so that he was surrounded by their warmth, their strength, their certainty. "This is real. We're real. What we feel for you is real." Jesse leaned back into them, letting himself be held, letting himself believe. What do you feel for me? The question hung in the air, weighted with hope and fear. The twins had called him theirs, had claimed him, had made him part of their life. But they'd never named what lay beneath all that possession. Cain turned Jesse around to face him, cupping his face in those large, gentle hands. "We feel everything," he said simply. "Want, need, protectiveness, affection. Call it what you want, but know that you matter to us. You're not just some farm boy we took in. You're ours in every way that counts, and we don't let go of what's ours." "Never," Abel agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "You're stuck with us now, Jesse Crawford, for as long as you'll have us." Tears burned behind Jesse's eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. He'd spent so long believing he was unlovable, that what he was made him wrong, broken, undeserving of affection. But here were two men who saw him completely and wanted him anyway, who claimed him and meant it, who made him feel valued in ways he'd never imagined possible. "Forever," Jesse whispered. "I'll have you forever." The twins pulled him close, and Jesse let himself be held, let himself be loved, in whatever fierce, possessive way they knew how to love. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. Jesse Crawford had come to Thornfield Ranch with nothing but desperation and hidden shame. He'd found work, yes, but more than that, he'd found a home, found men who saw past his defenses to the truth underneath, found the courage to stop hiding and start living as his authentic self. And in the arms of the Maddox twins, surrounded by their strength and their certainty and their unwavering claim on him, Jesse finally understood what it meant to belong, not just to a place, but to people. To be valued not despite what he was, but because of it. The ranch would continue its rhythms, cattle to tend, horses to break, fences to mend. But now, Jesse would face it all with the knowledge that he wasn't alone, that two men had looked at him and decided he was worth keeping, worth claiming, worth fighting for. And that made all the difference in the world.